This whole story didn't begin with some heroic clash or a grand war, but with the ladies-in-waiting who stumbled upon King Sigismund III in a condition so alarming that it left them shaken for years. I still remember how they described him. Tired, drained, and surrounded by an awful heaviness, as if something in him had gone terribly wrong. Even the strongest among them had to step away to gather themselves. It was October 16, 1617. That day, the king's personal staff saw, for the first time, the consequences of a secret life he had been hiding beneath the city's cathedral. And let me tell you, this isn't a tall tale. This is the truth, as ugly as it was. If you're still listening by the time this part of the story rolls around, well, I respect your courage. Most folks would have walked away by now. See, King Sigismund, darling of the nobles, patron of every musician he fancied, had lived a double life for years. By day, he was the cold, polished monarch drifting through grand balls with tired eyes. But once the sun went down, he'd slip out of the palace with a tight circle of companions and vanish beneath the cathedral. Back in 1604, a private club had taken root under that holy building. Only select men knew about it, courtiers, merchants, and the occasional traveler who fit the mood. The entrance was hidden behind the altar, behind a heavy oak panel only a few trusted hands could move. Servants whispered the place was called the pleasure cellar, though no one dared to say out loud what happened there. There were no women, only men dressed in elaborate garments, perfumed with oils you couldn't find in any marketplace. Down there, people let loose in ways they never would in daylight. Strange games, heavy drinking, rituals that made little sense to anyone sober. And Sigismund, well, he demanded a sort of reverence that blurred the line between theater and madness. But on that October night in 1617, something went wrong. The king stayed in the cellar far longer than usual, and when his companions finally carried him back, he was barely conscious. The moment the ladies-in-waiting changed his clothes, they noticed something was terribly off. A troubling smell lingered, and the king trembled like a man caught somewhere between shame and fear. The palace panicked. By the morning of October 3rd, the royal physician, von Gurdon, had been summoned. After examining the king, he admitted very quietly that His Majesty's condition was delicate. Something in his body simply wasn't working the way it should anymore, and it was causing him constant pain and humiliation. The king, overwhelmed with shame, swore everyone present to secrecy. Anyone who talked risked losing their life. But people talk, especially when they shouldn't. And before long, whispers drifted through every hallway. From that day forward, his life became a sort of quiet torment. Eating hurt him, moving hurt him, and he could barely appear in public. The servants tried makeshift remedies to help him move about with dignity, but nothing really worked. And yet, somehow, he still insisted on sneaking down to that cellar at night, clinging to the only place where he felt in control. By mid-October, rumors seeped beyond the palace walls. At a tavern near the city gate, a former servant told patrons the king now walked stiffly, like someone nursing a constant wound, and that his presence carried such a strange scent that even the dogs grew uneasy. By December, noble families were quietly sending gifts to physicians, hoping they might find a cure, or at least protect their daughters from being summoned to the palace. But Sigismund, stubborn as ever, refused to step back. Even with his health failing, he kept running the secret club, adding new rituals, new contests, new layers to his strange little kingdom under the cathedral. Some who wrote about him later said he didn't fear death at all. What he feared was being alone. Then the real nightmare began. On November 17, 1617, the palace was thrown into chaos. The royal doctors met for an emergency council. After a long and painful examination, they finally admitted what they'd been whispering for weeks. The king's condition was worsening rapidly, and his body no longer responded to him at all. The affected area had grown larger, far larger than anyone expected, and it terrified the physicians. This was all written in the logbook of Hans von Weide, the court doctor, and from that day on, the palace lived in quiet dread, as if the shadows themselves knew the king's days were counting down. Even with his troubling diagnosis, the king had no intention of abandoning that secret cellar beneath the church. On November 21st, 1617, he went back down again, almost as if nothing could keep him from that place. Down there, surrounded by those he called his brothers, Sigismund threw himself into strange rituals that took on a new, unsettling twist. Now the men were expected to treat his illness like a sign of divine favor, something that proved he was chosen for a higher purpose. Some members later confessed in their journals that the king wanted offerings brought directly to him, and every evening turned into a bizarre performance. Masks, games, and ceremonial dances dedicated to what he called his test. Meanwhile, the palace doctors were doing everything they could to help him look and feel like himself again. They tried herbal poultices, special candles, blessed water, even odd devices meant to support the failing part of his body. But every attempt ended in disappointment. The herbs did nothing, the candles accomplished little, and the contraptions only made things worse. By December 1617, the doctors were in despair. His condition was progressing faster than anything they had ever seen. Each week brought new signs that his body was losing control, and the king grew angrier with every report. But that was only the beginning. Cut off from most of the world, Sigismund grew more volatile. He held gatherings only for a handful of trusted confidants, yet even these private dinners often descended into awkwardness. More than once, right in the middle of a meal, something unpleasant would seep through. An odor, a stain, a reminder that his illness had its own will. His guests recoiled, and the king lashed out at his servants, accusing them of sabotage, incompetence, or betrayal. He exiled some from the palace entirely for nothing more than a startled look. His relationship with women deteriorated too. He stopped allowing the ladies-in-waiting anywhere near him, insisting that women were the source of his misfortune. Instead, he surrounded himself with men, lovers, admirers, attendants, who stayed with him late into the night. He demanded absolute devotion from them, treating their loyalty like a shield against the world's judgment. Rumors spread quickly. Some courtiers swore his illness was punishment for years of secret indulgence and those nightly ceremonies in the cellar. Others whispered he had been poisoned by political enemies, as if something inside him had been slowly destroyed. One lady-in-waiting even wrote in her private diary that she had seen a glow beneath the king's robes, as if something otherworldly was radiating through him. A doorway, she wrote, to somewhere not meant for the living. In the city streets, people said the king had opened a gateway to the future, and that his sickness wasn't just a disgrace, but a warning of the dynasty's coming end. Then things took an even darker turn. By late January 1618, the doctors were reporting changes in the king's condition that terrified even the most seasoned among them. His body simply wouldn't heal. Nothing helped. He became a prisoner inside himself, trapped in discomfort and humiliation, yet still clinging to the nightly rituals in the cellar. The palace grew thick with fear, whispers, and the sense that something unholy lingered in the halls. By early February, Sigismund III had almost completely lost his grip on reality. Pain, shame, sleepless nights, and strange visions had blended into one long nightmare. After months of isolation, surrounded only by a chosen few, he convinced himself that his affliction wasn't a curse at all, but a sign of divine contact. That's when a new superstition was born in the palace. Sigismund began claiming that spirits, dark ones, were speaking through his suffering. And on February 12, 1618, the chronicles recorded the first so-called prophetic session in the cathedral. That day, the king ordered all his secret companions, along with priests, alchemists, and even jesters, to gather in a hidden chamber. The place had been meticulously prepared. A ring of candles in the center, a heavy chair with a cutout seat, and mirrors arranged so everyone could see the king's reflection from every angle. He arrived wearing a richly embroidered robe, looking pale and feverish, almost possessed. Servants lowered him onto the chair, and he demanded silence. Then, with trembling hands, he revealed the source of his supposed visions, declaring that what he suffered was now a doorway for messages from beyond. What happened next was stranger than any rumor that ever reached the city gates. The rituals became more elaborate with every passing day. By February 19th, a group calling themselves the Council of Clairvoyant Witnesses had formed around the king. Their job was to record every prophecy he claimed was being channeled through him. Some said they heard the voice of a demon. Others insisted it was the whisper of an ancient wind. A few believed these visions marked the beginning of a new age for the throne. Every ritual ended with some strange gesture of devotion. Someone tossing a coin at his feet, for luck. Someone kissing the ground beneath him. Someone fainting from the intensity of it all. And the king welcomed every bit of it. Some people at those gatherings went so far as to toss flower petals toward the king, believing it would bless the whole court. Others even released small animals, like mice, thinking it brought good fortune. And the king, he accepted every bit of it with this strange, feverish devotion, as if he truly believed he was the centerpiece of some great prophecy. By February 25, 1618, these ceremonies weren't secret anymore. They had gone public. Nobles from across the kingdom were invited, and sometimes even carefully selected townsfolk. The crowds grew so large that the line of people stretched from the cathedral steps all the way to the city gates. Families came together, parents, children, elderly relatives, hoping to witness whatever miracle they believed was unfolding. Some folks paid ridiculous sums just for the chance to leave a piece of cloth on the altar or take home a scrap that had brushed against what they called the prophet's burden. Word spread through those lines that the king's condition wasn't an illness at all, but either the sign of the world's end or the beginning of a new golden age. Relics, anything rumored to have been near the king, became priceless. Servants sold scraps of fabric, old sheets, even bits of wood from the furniture, swearing each item carried mystical power. Over in the markets of Warsaw and Krakow, the resellers practically had street wars trying to get hold of these objects. Some villages even set aside entire rooms, little shrines, where people prayed to these supposed relics for healing, luck, or blessings. Meanwhile, the king's behavior drifted further into dangerous territory. He demanded that everyone at court functions bow before him in exaggerated displays of loyalty. More than once, right in the middle of a ceremony, he'd burst into uncontrollable laughter or smash his hands on the throne while shouting orders for jesters to sing hymns about his holy suffering. Anyone who flinched or even looked uneasy paid a steep price. Exile, disgrace, public mockery. Sometimes he staged loyalty tests. Courtiers had to approach him, acknowledge his ailment in some symbolic way in front of everyone, and then walk barefoot across the cold cathedral stones to wash away the curse. A number of them fell sick or collapsed afterward, but none dared refuse. And yet, the worst hadn't come. By late February and into March 1618, people all over the country were whispering that the gates of hell had cracked open inside the palace. Some families refused to say the king's name at all, convinced he was cursed. Peasants stopped bringing gifts to the capital, and rich merchants avoided any invitations from the court, terrified they might catch the so-called prophetic sickness. Even priests visiting from Rome were stunned. They kept quiet and shared their real feelings only in confidential letters home. Then came the night everything changed. On March 6, 1618, during one of the king's oracular sessions, an event packed to the walls with nobles, priests, and curious onlookers, lightning struck the cathedral dome. Flames raced across the ceiling. Candles toppled. People screamed and trampled each other trying to escape the hall. Servants later found the king unconscious on the stone floor beside his ceremonial chair. A wooden plaque lay on his chest, with a message carved into it. Here ends the path of the prophet. After that, nobody doubted anymore. The king had fully lost his grasp on reality. His authority now rested only on fear and the chaos that twisted through the palace. By mid-March 1618, the royal residence in Warsaw had become a place where reason no longer applied. Stories of the king's visions spread across all of Poland, drawing charlatans, healers, alchemists, and self-declared miracle workers from as far as Spain and the Ottoman Empire. Everyone hoped to be the one who cured the king and became the savior of the crown. On March 17th, the palace opened its doors to anyone offering a remedy. Suddenly the corridors swarmed with healers carrying jars of foul-smelling ointments, alchemists traveling with sacks of mysterious powders, and craftsmen dragging strange wooden and metal contraptions. Each person hoped to earn wealth and glory, and none cared much about the risk of failure. But the king had grown increasingly paranoid and cruel. He trusted no one, not even his oldest allies. He stormed through the halls day and night, insisting servants accompany him everywhere. One misstep, one accidental glance, one pause too long, and he'd have someone thrown out of the city or locked in a dungeon. Whenever the physicians came near, he turned bitter and unpredictable. That was the state of our king, and the state of the kingdom he ruled. Sometimes the king would suddenly grab the first unlucky servant he met and demand that they stick out their tongue, bow, or stand perfectly still, claiming it would somehow help them understand the nature of his illness. The palace turned into a sort of cruel playground, where anyone who came too close risked being dragged into another bizarre medical trial. And honestly, all that turmoil was only the calm before an even bigger storm. On March 23, 1618, a wandering healer named Franz Whittle arrived, boasting that he possessed a golden thread capable of repairing any wound and restoring a man's honor. He called it the operation of the century. Hundreds gathered to watch. The king was placed on a gilded couch, given a strong sedative, and the hall filled with music, trumpets, drums, candles casting wild shadows on the walls. Whittle and his assistants tried to sew the damaged area using that shimmering thread, making a show out of the ritual. But the moment they began, everything fell apart. The gold snapped, the silver clasps loosened, and the procedure turned into chaos. The king woke mid-operation, screaming and cursing everyone around him. People fainted. Others covered their faces from the overpowering odor of blood and sweat. A dark stain spread across the stone floor as servants rushed to help. The failure instantly became the talk of the entire court. After the golden thread disaster, the attempts grew stranger and more desperate. On April 2nd, a German doctor arrived with an invention he called a metal corset, supposedly designed to hold the damaged tissue in place. Instead, it pinched the skin, worsened the wounds, and caused the king unbearable pain until it was removed 3 days later, leaving deep, angry sores. Other healers tried bitter herbal brews, clay molds, even mechanical locks meant to stabilize the body. Every attempt only made things worse. The king retreated deeper into isolation. His chambers were aired out 5 times a day, but nothing helped. The smell clung to the walls, soaked into the furniture, even chased away the mice from the basement. Servants replaced carpets and chairs weekly, and still the air felt heavy and sick. In the middle of all this, the king insisted on keeping his loyalty guard near him at night, a group of male companions he trusted more than anyone else. The strongest among them was Franciszek, a towering man nearly 2 meters tall. Servants whispered in their diaries that after nights spent with Franciszek, the king seemed calmer, though his condition always worsened afterward. With each passing day, Sigismund became more volatile. He would stop servants without warning, order them to strip down or kneel, or make them pour water over each other for good luck. Anyone who hesitated faced punishment, sometimes public flogging, sometimes being denied food. He forbade whispering in the corridors and reacted violently to even a hint of suspected conspiracy. People were expelled from the city or thrown into prison without trial. But something unexpected happened next. By April 15, 1618, the king's condition had become the subject of street jokes and mocking songs. Even children sang about it in Warsaw's narrow alleys. Letters from city residents reported new humiliations each day. Today, one note read, "The king forced his entire staff to stand in one hall for 4 hours straight, so that no one would miss the moment his wound began to bleed." The palace became a place of constant dread. Everyone tried to avoid catching the king's eye. Yet the ceremonies continued, stranger than ever. Sigismund ordered aura cleansings. Elderly healers were brought in to wave herbs around him, pour concoctions over his back, sprinkle ash or salt in symbolic gestures meant to block evil spirits. No one believed he would recover anymore, but everyone kept up the charade, terrified of angering him. The final month of spring 1618 sealed his fate. His sickness spiraled completely out of control. The ceremonies at the castle became absurd, like tragic plays performed for an audience too frightened to laugh. And the king himself looked like a haunted man, torn between pain, paranoia, and an insatiable hunger for attention. By May 11, 1618, Sigismund ordered preparations for a massive festival he called the Day of Royal Fun, an event he intended to surpass every celebration held before. Musicians, acrobats, jesters, cooks, even blacksmiths were summoned to contribute. Servants roamed the halls gathering strange supplies for entertainment: leather straps, pots of oil, thick cords, colored ribbons. He wanted a spectacle, and he wanted the world to see it. The king personally designed every detail of the event. He wanted his final performance, the great test, to astonish not only his own courtiers but every ruler across Europe. And so, the Day of Royal Fun arrived on May 23, 1618. More than 300 guests gathered in the palace, the nobility with their families, foreign diplomats, curious courtiers, each expecting another spectacle from the increasingly unpredictable monarch. When Sigismund finally appeared, he looked both exhausted and strangely exhilarated. He wore a magnificent robe cinched with a golden belt, and behind him jesters rolled out a cart filled with long leather cords, freshly oiled for dramatic effect. The courtiers whispered bets about which European monarch might dare imitate such a stunt. They joked about the length of the cords, chuckled behind their sleeves, and exchanged knowing smirks, as if this were all some kind of carnival. A special throne had been placed on a raised platform in the center of the great hall. Servants stood on either side of it, holding the ends of a single 10-meter leather cord like it was part of a bizarre theatrical act. Ignoring his obvious pain, the king climbed up to take his place before the onlookers. The whole spectacle felt like something out of a surreal play. Musicians blasted out cheerful marches. The crowd shouted encouragement, and courtiers waved flags bearing the royal crest, as if they were cheering at a festival rather than a solemn gathering. Sigismund began the ritual. With the help of his closest attendants, he slowly fed the oiled cord into a hidden compartment built into his throne, a dramatic illusion meant to impress the crowd. Inch by inch, the cord disappeared, and although the audience initially laughed, the mood changed quickly. Some people turned their heads away, unsettled by the king's strained expression. Others slipped out of the hall altogether. The scoreboard on the wall updated the length consumed by the contraption, each meter making the atmosphere heavier. By the halfway point, the crowd had split into two camps. Those still applauding, and those standing pale and silent, no longer sure whether they were witnessing entertainment or a tragedy. After a long, drawn-out process, the entire 10 meters had disappeared. The hall erupted in applause, relieved the ritual had reached its climax. Jesters danced around the platform in celebration. Sigismund, trembling from exertion, reached for the opposite end of the cord to complete the final flourish of the act. The hall went silent. Everyone waited for the triumphant moment the king had promised. But instead of triumph, everything fell apart. The years of illness and countless failed treatments had weakened him far more than anyone realized. As he pulled on the cord for the finale, the hidden mechanism inside the throne shifted, and something within him gave way. Sigismund let out a sharp, startled cry, and then collapsed backward, completely still. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then panic exploded through the hall. Guests rushed for the exits, knocking over chairs and decorations. Others froze, unable to comprehend what they had seen. A few women fainted. Servants struggled to keep order as people tripped over the cord that now lay tangled between the throne and the fallen king. By the time the hall emptied, only bewildered doctors, stunned attendants, and a handful of courtiers remained. The king was gone. His death was instantaneous. The whole event turned into one of the darkest legends of the age, known forever as Sigismund's News. Within 2 days, poems and mocking verses about the king's bizarre end circulated throughout Poland. The marks left on the palace floor lingered for months, and the famous cord was briefly treated like a cursed relic before the Regency Council ordered it burned. A new expression entered the language of the nobility: "Don't pull someone else's cord." a warning about pride, meddling, and pushing a man or a kingdom too far. The dynasty trembled on the brink of collapse. Many courtiers fled the capital, fearing what might come next. Superstition spread like wildfire, and the people whispered that the king's downfall was a sign of something greater. What happened that night became a lesson not just for Poland, but for every royal court across Europe. A reminder that when madness, loneliness, and unchecked power combine, they can destroy not only a man's body, but the very idea of a state.